From Israel to Ukraine to politics here at home, the world has gotten a lot more complicated in the last few weeks. And it is not getting any easier, with Republicans in the House unable to elect a speaker, basically stopping any action in Congress. Joining me now to discuss all of it, Chris Christie, former governor of my home state of New Jersey and candidate for the Republican nomination for president. Governor, thank you for being here. We got a lot to cover on this Monday, and I want to start with what is happening in Congress. It has been nearly 3 weeks since Kevin McCarthy stepped down, and Republicans still have not elected a new speaker. What's going on?
Well, I mean, Stephanie, the only way to put it is we look like the gang that can't shoot straight in the Republican Party. And this goes back to the foolishness of those 8 people who, in my view, fired Kevin McCarthy along with the 206 Democrats without cause. And there was no reason to get rid of Kevin McCarthy, and they certainly had no plan, is obvious now, as to what would happen afterwards. And so we now sit in a situation where we have, 9 candidates for Speaker now. We've gone through 2 nominees of the party since Kevin McCarthy. It's an embarrassment. It's an embarrassment to the party and to the country. And my view is just pick somebody now. I mean, we have work to do. You just led off this interview with discussing Israel and Ukraine. Our southern border is an issue. Taiwan is an issue that needs attention. And we need a House of Representatives that functions to be able to address these problems. And they should just pick a speaker and let's move on.
It wasn't the Democrats' job to save Kevin McCarthy. Republicans are in the majority. And let's say Republicans do pick somebody. They get them over the line. Have the last 3 weeks shown us that this House is ungovernable? That 8 that you speak of, they don't appear to have any sort of legislative agenda.
Well, look, I think, Stephanie, that's going to be up to whoever the new speaker is as to whether it's ungovernable or not. Each person who takes that gavel gets an opportunity to be able to show whether they can govern or not. So I don't want to prejudge any of that. And look, you're right that Democrats have no responsibility to save Kevin McCarthy, but they have contributed to the problem. And so, this is the Republicans' responsibility. It is those 8 Republicans' fault in the main. But you also have, a number of Democrats there, in fact, all the Democrats, who voted to fire Kevin McCarthy. And I don't know what the cause for that firing was.
Contributed how, sir? Can you cite an example of Kevin McCarthy or Republicans in the last administration working for a solution to help Democrats? Right now, the people whose names are being thrown around for the next speaker, the majority of them didn't even vote to certify Joe Biden as president.
Well, that's not the case with Tom Emmer, who is the leading candidate and was the majority whip here, or the conference leader, rather, for the Republicans. And I've known Tom for a long time. He's a good, smart, reasonable guy. And I think, he's certainly someone who could make a very good speaker. In the end, the Democrats knew what was going on here. And I don't want to waste a lot of time on this, Stephanie, except to say that those eight Republicans could not have fired Kevin McCarthy on their own. If Democrats made the decision that Kevin McCarthy didn't deserve to be fired, he wouldn't be fired. So
Sir,
they may have their own reasons for it. I'm sure if they came on the show, they'd articulated it.
It was Matt Gaetz.
Matt Gaetz couldn't have done it by himself.
Who brought this to the floor? No Democrat, Matt Gaetz, a fellow Republican.
No. Yeah, it's exactly right. And I've condemned Matt Gaetz for that, but he could not have done it by himself. He couldn't have done it without the other 7 Republicans who joined him, and he couldn't have done it without all 206 Democrats. That does not, and I have not said through this entire interview, that Democrats are solely responsible. In fact, I've said that the Republicans are primarily responsible, and those 8 are primarily responsible. But the fact of the matter is, you can't get to a majority vote to remove a speaker without those 206 Democrats who voted to remove him as well. And I'm sure they have their reasons for having wanted to remove him. I haven't heard them really articulate them, but it doesn't matter. They contributed to this chaos right now by deciding to remove a Speaker of the House.
Well, perhaps it's time for a power sharing agreement. Let's move on, because as you said, we have a lot to cover. This presidential race, you would like to be the Republican nominee, but despite 4 indictments and a laundry list of other things, Donald Trump is still in the lead. Why is that?
Look, I think that he's the nominee twice in the last 8 years. And there's a lot of folks who still think that sticking with Donald Trump is the best way to beat Joe Biden. I think that's fatally flawed on a couple of fronts. First, I don't think Donald Trump is fit to be president of the United States, and that's one of the reasons I'm running. Secondly, I think if he were the nominee, he wouldn't beat Joe Biden. And third, I do think that our party needs to restore a sense of decency to the Oval Office, and that would not happen with Donald Trump as president.
Decency, I would agree with you wholeheartedly, is what this country needs. I want to talk about Israel and Gaza. Last week, you were saying how important it would be for President Biden to go to Israel. He did that. How would you evaluate his handling of the situation thus far?
Look, I think I would agree with everything the president's done since the October 7th attack. I think his words have been smart and sound. As I said earlier in the week, I think that him going to Israel was a very, very important symbol of our support for Israel, for their territorial integrity, and for the safety of their citizens. And it made me, Stephanie, think back to September 11th, when Tony Blair flew over from Great Britain to sit in the gallery in the House of Representatives when President Bush made his address to the nation in a joint session of Congress. I remember how I felt so great that America's #1 ally in the world, from Great Britain, decided to come over here and not just say he supported us, but show it with his physical presence. I think President Biden did exactly the same thing by traveling to Israel, and I think he's to be commended for it.
He warned Israel not to be hasty in their decision-making now because they're filled with rage. And he said America made some mistakes after 9/11. Would you agree with that?
Look, I don't think there's really any mistakes that mattered that the United States made after 9/11, given that it's now been 22 years without a foreign terrorist attack on American soil. I think that over a number of administrations, starting with the Bush administration, but continuing through the ones that have come afterwards, they have made not all perfect decisions, but decisions that have preserved American life from domestic terrorist attacks. I think the Israelis have to have three things in mind, Stephanie. First is to make sure that they retaliate for the lives that were brutally taken of civilians in Israel. And we saw reports today of the reporters that were brought in to be shown unedited footage, and I've seen some of those reports from those reporters, and it is just as bad, if not worse, than what we thought. There has to be retaliation against the organization that did that. Secondly, I think every step needs to be taken to degrade Hamas, and the reason for that is this is to protect Israel's institutional and territorial integrity and its very existence and safety of its citizens. But third, they need to be thinking about what comes next. And was great progress being made towards agreements with other members in the Middle East and Arab nations in the Middle East. I think Israel has to keep their eye on that ball. The more they can make agreements with other countries in the Middle East, the more they can isolate Iran, Hamas, and Hezbollah. And the more isolated they are, the less of a danger they'll be to the existence of Israel and the safety of its people.
Governor Christie, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate having such a constructive conversation.